Hello and welcome to episode 15 of The Racer's Edge in association with F1 Racing Magazine as we look ahead to one of the globe's biggest sporting events, let alone motor racing events, the Le Mans 24 Hours this weekend. I do so with Allan McNish, one of the Audi drivers in contention for overall victory. He's already won Le Mans twice. He was a Toyota Formula One driver. He was a test driver for McLaren and for Benetton. He lives in Monte Carlo. He does spend some time in Cannes. He occasionally wears a black tie if he has to go to a formal do. I caught up with him on the drive from Monte Carlo to Cannes. He's behind the wheel of an Audi, unsurprisingly. We spoke about Le Mans mainly. We spoke about racing too. We spoke about his life. Alan, it's been a long road now, isn't it? I remember watching you at Rye House all those years ago, 3000. I was actually very near your shunt at Donington that time, and well, a lot of water under the bridge, but life's worked out pretty well. 2 Le Mans wins, driving for Audi, couldn't be better really. Lots of testing and very professional outfit.
It's funny because I was talking about it with somebody just a wee while ago, that you know there's been a great era of current Scottish drivers that followed on from Jim Clark and Jackie Stewart, and certainly it started our side off was David Leslie, and this current era with myself, with David Coulthard, with Dario Franchitti, we're coming to the ends of our racing careers, but it's been a fantastic trip for us all. We've all had great success, we've all stuck together, we've all had some difficult times that we've fought through, but in reality, you know, all of the good times far outweigh any difficult times. And, you know, I think that we can thank our lucky stars that there was that staircase, that starting, the people wanting to give a wee bit back into Scottish motorsport that allowed us to get the opportunity to move forward. And that definitely was there for me, David and Dario, with David Leslie at the beginning, and then Jackie took that onward and really sort of forced us into the limelight, if you like. And so if we're in a position to maybe do that for the next generation, and you know, I think they're doing okay at the moment as well, though.
Alan, do you spend any time thinking about Formula One and wishing that you'd had more of a shot at it?
No, to be honest, Peter, I'm not one of these people that looks backwards. You have done, and it just makes you grumpy. It doesn't do anything. You know, you just get so wound up in it all that you're better looking forward. And my career's never been straightforward. It's had its ups and downs, as you know. You know, you've been there at a lot of the times when it's gone fantastically well, and sometimes when it's not. And that's part of life, though, isn't it? It's exactly a replication of life. It's not always roses. But with regard to Formula One, you know, I started my Formula One time, if you like, with McLaren, and Senna and Berger were the race drivers. It taught me a heck of a lot about what you needed to do, because I thought racing was like a hobby. You know, I just drove and didn't think about the work you had to do behind it. And then suddenly I realised that I had to step up my game, and then with Schumacher and Patrese at Benetton, testing there again, I realised where I needed to improve. And then racing with Toyota and going on with Renault as the third driver with Jarno and Fernando, it's probably given me the tools that I've been able to exploit a very successful sports car career. And without all of that mileage, without all of that experience, I'm not so sure whether I would have been able to take all of the success out of sports cars that I have done.
Tell me about driving a 2012, 2013 Audi. What's it like to drive? How much of it is on rails? How much of it is actually being a racing driver?
How do you classify being a racing driver these days? I think, to sum it up very briefly, the technology that's in our R18 e-tron Quattro, just the name, the length of it, suggests that there's quite a lot. You know, we've got a V6 single turbo diesel engine that puts out in excess of 500 horsepower. We've got the e-tron Quattro electric energy that's transmitted through the front wheels, where the engine's driving the rear wheels, which gives it its four-wheel drive aspect to it. We have on the steering wheel over 100 parameters that we can adjust as drivers, and so, you know, it is a busy little car and a busy little cockpit. And performance-wise, I was just looking at the race stats from the Formula One Grand Prix that's just been in Bahrain, and their race times are similar to our race times. And so in pure lap time performance, it's effectively a Formula 1 car, but 300 kilos heavier. And it can do a 24-hour race without changing the gearbox, without changing the engine, without changing the discs or the pads, just refueling the diesel and fitting new tyres to every second or third pit stop. And so all in all, I have to say that nowadays these cars are flat out sprint cars, but they just are durable for 24 hours.
And what are they like physically to drive in terms of cockpit temperature, steering load, G-force?
It's heavy because we pull 3.5 G through some of the high speed corners at Le Mans, like Porsche curves. We've got cockpit temperatures, Bahrain, I talked about that last year in Bahrain. It was 40 degrees Celsius outside, and so inside it was probably 45, 46, and you're with an overall, you've got a helmet on, there's no fresh air coming in at all, and so it is a harsh little environment, and you're getting knocked and kicked around, and you're in it for effectively more than a Grand Prix distance at a time. And so overall, they are hard work, and you've got to muscle those cars around, and the difference between winning and losing is in seconds, not minutes. It's seconds after 6-hour races or 12-hour races, and that's part of the excitement about it nowadays, because nowadays the driver really has to attack from the start to the finish, and that's what we do. We're attacking racing drivers.
Alan, tell me about slower cars, particularly Le Mans, what that's like. Do you see that as part again of the art of motor racing, or is it something that is still not under control?
A little bit of both, to be honest with you. It is part of motor racing. Having to overtake is part of motor racing. I'm all in favour of that. I'm all in favour of having the different disciplines and categories involved in the Le Mans 24 Hours and that type of racing. On the other side of it, it is a tricky balance, because our cornering speeds can be, sorry, got to pay some money, can be 50, 60 miles an hour quicker than a Porsche GT3, for example. However, our straight line speeds are maybe only 10, 11 miles an hour quicker, and so therefore most of our overtaking now in traffic is done in the corners, and there's a high risk element to that, and you have to be very decisive. And when you've got that sort of speed differential, you make your commitment extremely early to overtake, so you do need to have an understanding with the other drivers, and sometimes that goes wrong. And the more cars that are on track, the more successful the championship is, but also the higher the risk factor of it. Now, I could easily turn around and say, well, they shouldn't have that, everyone should have a very high minimum standard. But my first time at Le Mans was 97, and there were 3 Portuguese brothers who were driving in GT2, and they were there. I think they were bankers by trade, and they were basically amateurs. But it was their Mount Everest, if you like, to race at Le Mans. And by chance, the way that the race ran, with the reliability issues of other cars and things, they ended up finishing on the podium. And to see 2 of the brothers crying as their other brother crossed the line, it just reminded me that, or it told me, because I wasn't aware of it, to be honest, that Le Mans is not just about the winner. It's about every single team beating their expectations to beat Le Mans itself before you actually can get on it. And so therefore I do think there is a place for the different categories and the different levels of drivers, and the semi-professional, semi-amateur drivers as well. It's just that it's sometimes a tricky compromise when you're coming up to them in the middle of the night in the Porsche curves, and you're going through there at maybe 60, 70 miles an hour faster.
Tell me about the middle of the night at Le Mans. Tell me about the fatigue factor, whether you notice it at all, whether you notice the 24-hour element, and what's it like driving at 3, 4 in the morning?
The first time I did it, it was something new, something different. It's silly little things that you noticed, like a little bit of flame coming out of the exhaust, because you would see the night light up in the mirror beside you. And then after you've done it 1 or 2 times, you realise you don't look at the lights around about the circuit, because it changes your focus, which pilots will probably know that you certainly shouldn't look at lights when you're flying at night, but I wasn't quite aware of that. And a lot of the little tricks, if you like, that you can only learn by experience become second nature. Now, we do so many endurance tests where we replicate the Le Mans 24 hours, but we actually do it for 30 hours, and when we start at say 9 in the morning and just run the car for 30 hours non-stop, complete exactly as if it was a race. So if there's a technical problem, we'll fix it as if it was a race. There's no sort of big long discussions. It's right, how do we get this running again as quickly as possible? And as drivers, you get used to that flow through the night, and in some ways it's a bit easier because you've got your tunnel of light, and that's it. You don't have the other distractions. You don't have all the other things that you can actually see in daylight around and about you, and it maybe helps in a little bit of focus. It's a bit cooler in the cockpit as well because obviously it's at night. You've got usually a softer compound of tyre because again the track grip is a little bit lower, but also it's a bit colder, so therefore you can run a softer compound of tyre which grips a bit better again, and I really like it. The tricky part is actually the next morning is sort of 7, 8 o'clock in the morning when you've not had a very good night's sleep, because you don't, because you're racing at Le Mans, for goodness sakes, the noise, never mind the adrenaline, everything else, and you have to sort of shake yourself awake and get back out and get on with it. Reality is, well, as soon as you get into the car and you pull away from the pit stop and you release the speed lane limiter and accelerate up towards Dunlop, the adrenaline fires you up and you're back there and running. And if you're fighting for a victory or a podium, then there is no problem. The hard ones are when you've had a problem and you have to come back from, say, a lap down, and you're basically running to the end with the hope that the opposition have a problem, that you're not really forcing the issue, you're just sort of keeping it there just in case. And that's when the fatigue really comes in.
And how near the car's limit do you end up typically driving?
Now, very close to it, because I'll go back 2 years. In 2011, the difference between first and second place was 13 seconds. That's less than 1/10 of a second per lap, each lap of the race. So if you lift off to let that car go through the corner and then I'll get him there the next lap, and you lose half a second, and then you do that maybe 2 or 3 times through the race, that's a fair proportion of the difference between winning and losing, and that just has forced us again to be driving more on the limit more of the time, and in some ways it's just the next level. And I think when I started at Le Mans, it was a transient phase between conserving the car in some way with gearboxes predominantly, to starting to drive it flat out when Audi brought the R8 into sports car racing. That was the first car you could really attack all the way from start to finish. But now you have to attack all the way from the start to finish because the opposition has also got roughly that capability. And if it's not another manufacturer that's got it, your teammate definitely has. And so, you've got to be on it all the way through. And, it comes back to it. That's what we do. That's what we started doing when we were, we boys in karting at Lark Hall and at Rowra and Stranraer and Felton and places when we were 11, 12 years old. We were just driving flat out from the start of the race to the end. It just happens to be that now they're not 10-minute races, they're 24-hour races.
Allan, do you believe that you can drive the perfect lap, or do you think that's beyond human ability? And if it is beyond a human, how do you cope with the driving errors that inevitably creep into a lap of Le Mans times 24 hours?
The perfect lap, I suppose, is a little bit of a myth, but then again, the only way that we could maybe judge that is by simulation, and we've got fantastic simulation systems that know the maximum grip of the aerodynamics of the car, they know the maximum grip of the tyre, they know the maximum performance of the engine, the hybrid systems and everything else, and it produces a lap time in a perfect condition day when there's no wind, when there's no other cars on track. And so therefore, if you get to that lap time or beat it, then you have to say that's as close to the perfect lap as what you're probably going to achieve. I think the reality is that it may feel like the perfect lap, but then someone might go a couple of hundreds quicker, and so it suggests your lap wasn't quite perfect, but 99.9%. And we only deal in 100% because, as Jackie Stewart says, you could, you're either pregnant or you're not. You either do the perfect lap or you don't. You're either on pole or you're not. And it's
Okay, let me phrase the question slightly differently then. Subjectively, from your point of view, how many perfect laps of Le Mans would you drive in a 24-hour period? But at the end of the lap, you say, "Yeah, that was about as good as it could be done."
probably about 3 in my career. And one of them was in pre-test in 1998 in the Porsche GT1, when Martin Brundle had stuck the Toyota on provisional pole. I had done a time that was about third, and the Mercedes was there, and it was all within a few tenths, and I was in the back of the truck, changed. I wasn't meant to drive again, and Herbert Amphera, the boss of Porsche, wandered in. He went, "Alan, could you get changed? We need you to go back out." I said, "Okay, what do you need me to do?" Herr Amphera, and he said, "I need you to go for pole." I said, "Well, yeah, but what do you want?" I said, "I want pole." "All right, okay, but don't crash the car." "Oh, fantastic, thanks very much." And that was the perfect build-up of the tyre, pressuring temperatures on the outlap, which was quite sensitive then, because we had tyres that lasted just a lap, so you had to get it spot on. And everything hooked up. There was a slight bit of traffic into Mulsanne, which just because of the way that I caught it at the apex didn't lose me anything. And then coming out, got a run down towards Indy, and I got provisional pole on the pretest by, well, I got the pole as it turned out, the pretest by something like half a tenth of a second over Martin. And knowing how hard Martin pushes and how fast he was, I was very proud of that lap. And that's probably the one that I can pull off the top of my head, but I wouldn't say it was more than a handful, that's for sure, over however many Le Mans that I've done.
And the point was, it felt like a pole lap even before you'd seen the time.
Oh, I knew it was a lap. And I knew it was a lap that, whether it was quick enough or not, the car couldn't go any faster. That was it. That was everything extracted out of it. And at Le Mans, because of the length of the track, because of the fact that you might hit traffic at certain points, because of the way you build up the grip in the tyre at the beginning, and it's difficult to to get that balance, especially back then. It was one where just everything clicked perfectly into place, and the lap time came from that. But you can always look back into things and find a smidgen here or there. I suppose the more important question is, was your lap better than the next guy? Because if it was, you've got a chance of pole. And I have to say that I've had my fair share of those ones, and qualifying something that I actually enjoy. It's the one where you dig really deep, you throw the car into a corner with more commitment and speed than you've ever attained before, with the hope, with the knowledge, with the gut instinct that whatever happens, whether it oversteers or understeers, or you run out of line, you'll sort it out. You just have to sort it out. And that's the old seat of the pants instinctive driving that still gives you that kick, that still drives you, and it still makes you feel alive.
Alan, retrospectively, your Toyota year was a good year if you look at where the team went afterwards and where you were at, and it was a shame you didn't get more mileage, race mileage with Toyota. But looking at the test mileage you did at McLaren and Benetton, can you think of a lap there or a time there where you felt, yeah, I'm not that far away from a Michael or an Ayrton or whatever? I mean, whatever yardstick you were applying, how much leash were you allowed to run on in those testing days?
It depends what you were doing at different times. The first test I did was Estoril in '89, just before we went to Macau for the Formula 3 Grand Prix, Macau GP, and I was sitting in the V10 as it was then, and Senna's in the car next to me, and I did about 20 laps. And actually the first day I only did a few at the end of the day, just to sort of get ready and prepare myself for the next day. And like I say, I did a couple of laps. And I remember going down the hairpins, and there was 4 hairpins there, and I was going around, I was accelerating this thing, and I just came out of a Formula 3 car with 180 horsepower. I'm like, this doesn't have any power. Then I realised it was an old H-pattern gearbox, but I was actually going round them in 4th and not 2nd, because I'd caught the wrong gear. And then when I did get 2nd by chance, because the difference between 2nd and 4th and 6th was like tiny in that thing, I shot off up the hill, and it was like warp factor 3, and this is fast. And the next day I got into it, and like I said, did 20 laps and was about 6/10 off centre or something at the end of it. And then I felt, yeah, but I was just driving instinctively. And I suppose the funny thing about that was, he said it was a World Championship winning car with a World Championship winning driver that I was comparing myself to in my first time, and just having done a handful of laps and driving just with that natural instinct, the lap time was there. But to see the lap time and to see where it was in comparison in all the corners, Honda...
Nice V12 E-Type in front of us.
I'll tell you, that's worth a bit of money.
Yeah.
Look at that, 4 exhaust pipes. My son, who's 8, would say that makes it go faster because it's got 4 pipes on it.
And if he's an Emerson Fittipaldi fan, he's got a good number plate too.
Yeah. MO.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
What I was going to say was, now we're in this modern era of technology where the drivers are told on slowing down laps, you know, what they need to do and where they need to do it to try to maximise the performance. Back then, they had a speed trace, so it's just a line, and they had gears and throttle, and they had to have 2 pieces of paper, and they held them up together like an X-ray against the light to see where you were faster or slower. There was no real overlays. They couldn't overlay one lap to the other. It was so basic. But I've got those at home, and they'll be something that I'm sure I'm going to drag out and show my grandkids at some point in the future. Yeah, this was the first time I drove a Formula 1 car when I was a wee boy at 19.
Well, go on, there must have been some corners on the lap where you're actually as good, if not better than Ayrton, were there?
It was the slower corners, oddly. In the slow corners, once I got used to where the gearbox was, it was actually quite good. Where I lost was in the long right-hander, and you remember that old one, where it was nearly flat out. And the reason I lost was because I had no neck strength muscles. I didn't do any training in those days. You know, I just came straight out of school, basically. And going round that long right-hander, my old head started bobbling like a noddy dog in the back of a car. And they put new tyres on, and I only went a tenth or something quicker with a new tyre, just because I couldn't maximise it because of the fact that I didn't have the pure neck strength. And so over the course of that winter, that was me stuck in a gym training with a helmet with lead on the side of it, trying to do all these neck exercises to build it up to get to the point, like I said earlier on, where I needed to get up to that benchmark that I'd suddenly realised that if you wanted to be a professional in motorsport at a high level, you've got to be.
And how are your neck muscles now compared with that period?
Oh, crikey. Yeah, now, you know, they're so much stronger. You wouldn't have a problem nowadays going back into that car. The odd area that you probably would have an issue with is the sort of control of the heeling and towing. Because now I use my left foot to brake, my right foot to throttle, and it's a balance between the two of them. Whereas then you would brake with your right foot, you would blip the throttle with your right foot. At the same time, you would synchronise when you press the clutch and when you would snick it down the gears. So there was quite a few other different parameters going on. And not that it's any easier nowadays, because now we're attacking into the corner so much deeper and so much later and more aggressively that you've got a different type of balance. But that would be the thing that I would have to work at most to get my feel back for all of that basic heeling and towing sort of stuff, which incidentally I didn't really perfect at that point. I wasn't that good at it. Consequently, I've got the second gear dog ring that I damaged through the course of that test sitting at home in Scotland. It's in my office as one of my wee prized possessions.
I remember in karting, and it was weather very like this, I remember watching you, and you were very, very good at just getting the back end out enough to get the corner nice and straight. And if you can tell anything in karting, I suppose the one thing that was clearly obvious then was how precise you were, and how you were able to put very, very rapid movement into the kart without it basically upsetting the kart too much, and making the corner, once you're in it, looking pretty straightforward. You did all the preparation beforehand.
Well, it is all about preparation. It's something that I try to suggest to young drivers, that everything is about preparation, whether it be a corner. It's about the preparation of the corner, or whether it be your race weekend, it's about preparing your race weekend mentally, physically, making sure that you've got your visors prepared, some of the basics, make sure you've got all the tear-offs you need and all the ancillary bits and pieces. And for the corner, the braking point is the the first moment that the cart or the car knows it's going to be doing something apart from accelerating flat out. And so you've got to give it the information in a way that it can understand, and it will give you a feedback from that, and then you go through the process of the braking phase, the turn-in phase, the release of the brake pressure, the going back on the throttle at the apex, and the running out to the exit curb, and using the exit curb and sometimes the grass if necessary, or whatever it may be. But in my opinion, it always comes from that first application of the brake, because that is the first moment, like I say, that the vehicle knows you're going to be doing something different with it. And you know, they respond. This is a car, it's pieces of metal and plastic and carbon and bits and pieces all moulded together, but ultimately I'm driving it. I've got to drive it, I've got to tell it what I want, I've got to do it in such a fashion that it can understand me, that we can communicate, that you're sitting into the car, that you're working as one, even although you're two different separate parts, and one of them is non-emotional and the other one is very emotional. And I think that you either have a bit of an instinct for that or you don't, and karting, as you say, is a fantastic way to actually see that basic instinct, and also I think probably one of the most pure ways to see a real racing driver.
Alan, changing the subject a little bit, let's talk about Jackie Stewart. Much maligned in some quarters in the Formula One world. It's kind of politically cool to be anti-Jackie. I guess that comes from various powers that be. But from your perspective, Jackie?
Jackie, I think, is two or three different people, depending on how well you get to know him. You see you don't say you know the fantastically successful racing driver, you know the very successful businessman. Then if you get to know him a little bit, you understand a little bit about the perfectionism that he puts into everything that he does, about the fact that he is a very driven person, about the fact that he will leave no stone unturned to achieve any objective that he wants to achieve, the fact that he's always making sure that he is immaculately dressed, the fact that he always seems to have a skill to know when to get into something, but more importantly to know when to get out of it. And I don't mean that as a car, when the right time to retire is, obviously he made the right call for that, but also in business decisions, you know, he always just has got that knack for it. And then there's a third part of Jackie, the human, the husband to Helen, the father to Mark and to Paul, the very humorous, the very open, the very generous Jackie that I've seen. You know, when I was a wee 17-year-old boy from Dumfries and racing against Paul, because we started our Formula Ford careers at the same time, and then going forward when I was actually racing against Paul, whether it be in Formula 3 and racing against Paul Stewart Racing, his own team. But Jackie was always there for a phone call or a bit of advice, or picking up the phone on my behalf and speaking to teams just to say, hey, have you seen this wee Scottish lad McNish? You know, he's maybe somebody you should have a wee think about. Stick him in your car, you won't be disappointed. And all of that was for free, because we spoke maybe the same language, because we came from the same area, we've got tartan trews on. I don't know, but all in all, that's a side that not many people see of Jackie. And to me, he has been a big inspiration for obvious reasons. The tartan on the helmet's one thing that's very obvious, and that came from him. He was an inspiration. He's been a big factor in the development of me as an individual away from the circuit. Whether, you know, again, I remember going to one of his big events, the Mechanics Trust at Gleneagles, when I was 17 and sitting next to Patrick Head. You know, as a young 17-year-old racing in Formula Ford, I was positioned next to Patrick Head, who was the engineering director of, you know, the most successful Formula 1 team at that time. That was just absolutely impossible to replicate or to get involved in any other way. But at the same time, he was always there just making sure my tie was straight, making sure that I was dressed appropriately, and that I knew what was expected of me in these sort of environments. And he did the same for David, he did the same for Dario, and as much as at times we thought, what's he talking about? You know, we just need to race, that's what we're about. When we get a bit older and we look back, we realise that everything he said was absolutely spot on, and it was on the nail, and it was done for the right reasons, it was said for the right reasons, because he wanted us to succeed. He wanted us to go on and do as well as what we could actually do.
It's a shame, and I know you don't like talking about shames, but it's a shame, I think, that Jackie hasn't been able to, or been allowed to play a larger role in the administration and the direction of motorsport in the last 20 years. A, and B, it's a shame that so much money and so much media is now focused on Formula One and not on the rest of motorsport. I'd just be interested to get your thoughts on both those points.
Well, I think he's always been involved, but he's a bit behind the scenes. You know, he definitely has directed a lot of the safety developments. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Jackie, I can pretty much say that because I've had some good accidents in my time, and you know, if Jackie hadn't have started the development and the big push on safety, and still phoning me up after you've had a little bit of a bump saying, "Are you okay?" "Yes, I'm okay, Jackie." "Well, this is your opportunity. You've got to go back, because these are areas that you can influence for the better of the sport in the future." So he's still there influencing in the background, but maybe you don't see it on the front line. In terms of his influence, I do think that people do listen to him, but I do think there's also a bit of jealousy. You know, we've got a very egotistical pit lane. It's a small paddock, everybody knows each other, and you know that us racing drivers, we do hold grudges about things that happened a long time ago, and we wait our time to get them back. And that might be somebody knocking you off at Silverstone in 1987. I haven't forgotten, I'm not telling you it is, but these sort of situations, you know, they rear their ugly heads, and a lot of it is jealousy. But I would say that if he was in a position of more management power, the sport would be a strong place, and I think it would be a commercially very sound place, because he is very commercially minded, and it would have the good old Scottish tradition of being able to pay for itself and not in hock. And that's something that I think sometimes we should remember in our sport, because you know, it's not totally balanced across the board. If you look at the teams at the front and the support they get, and the teams at the back in Formula 1, the support they do not get, then you know, that side of things I think would be maybe reassessed a little bit. In terms of the distribution of wealth through the sport as a whole, I have to say that I think with Formula 1 being such a worldwide event, that other parts of the sport have been able to piggyback in the back of it most of the time. There's definitely points when Formula 1 has suppressed some of maybe the competitors for the money and for the sponsorship dollars and the manufacturers, but I'm a bit of a believer that the strongest will survive. And as much as you know, you could argue how well, if it wasn't for, everybody's got the same opportunity to create what Formula 1 did create, but there was only certain people were able to do it through the course of the years, and so therefore I think it has deserved its place, but also it can't rest on its laurels, because coming up on the blind side, people are looking for other things, and the world's changing very quickly. Motorsport has to keep up with it. We cannot just think that it's going to be successful in 15 years' time, and the next generation of kids coming through will have that interest just because they have now. Because I just look at my son. He'll never pick up a magazine, I don't think. I think he'll look at an iPad and he'll be looking at his love of motorsport through a completely different medium to me. It won't be waiting for for going into the newsagents on a Thursday morning for the Bible and to read all the little bits in the back, because it's all instant gratification in some ways nowadays. And motorsport has got, without any question of a doubt in my mind, keep up with that pace of development, or it will be left behind.
And what about Allan McNish, the race driver now? Loving it, obviously. Driving as well as ever, obviously. But you ain't going to do it forever. No. Or maybe you are.
No, I can honestly sort of say I think there's a couple of things that probably pull to the end of your natural career, and one of them is the stopwatch. It doesn't lie. You know, it kind of suggests when maybe you should have a look at the next stage. At this moment in time, the stopwatch is suggesting everything's still on track. And the other one is the desire to put in the effort and the energy you have to nowadays to succeed. You know, I take last year, I think it was 240 nights in hotels away from home. And, you know, that does naturally just drag energy out of you. And it's not necessarily physical energy, it's just sitting at airports, you know, and sitting on planes. You know, again, last year I was in the air, actual flying time, for over 2 weeks. So, you know, if you think now we're at the beginning of June, basically, and then getting off an aeroplane, getting on the 1st of June and getting off on the 15th of June, that's what you do in a year. And so that does drag it out of you.
And you've basically been doing that since, what, 1986-ish?
Yeah, for a long period. And I think there becomes a natural point when that drains you and you want to move on to the next thing. I'm not quite there yet, but the key important thing, which funnily enough I kind of learned from Jackie, was that you've got to have something to replace it with. And that's partly the adrenaline rush, so it's got to be something quick and decisive and certain competitive instincts to it. And also it has got to be something as well that you feel that you need to develop at, because I would say it's like a second career where you need to then move forward, use all of your experience and try to learn the ropes and to some extent become an apprentice again, to go through that sort of education process. And that's something that can be quite exciting. So like I say, we're not quite there yet, but I'm definitely at 43 closer to the end of my career than I am at the beginning, and you won't see me sort of running on to the 50s, I'm pretty sure of that. Certainly not as a professional racing driver. I'll drive for fun and the pure enjoyment of driving, that I'm quite sure, but not where my whole career depends on it.
Well, here's an idea for a competitive deal in 4 years' time. You put yourself up for election FIA president. That'll be competitive.
Oh, no.
And you might win it then, Alan.
No.
You could do it.
Yeah, but it's funny, the few things, you never say never, you never know what's going to happen. And this sport sort of has got odd turns, and my career's testament to that. But I'm not a big fan of politics. I could just see so many long nights and headaches and things like that for people looking at their own interests as opposed to the sometimes the greater good, which is the way the world is and it's the way the sport is. But I think there's probably better people to sort of sit in that chair than myself. It's a similar sort of thing. It's a funny thing that I never thought that I would want to be involved in a team, because you have to deal with drivers, and I know what I'm like. I'm a nightmare, absolute nightmare, changing my mind all the time about when I want to go somewhere and do this and do that, and always feel that I need more money for doing that, and I don't want to do that PR. We're a disaster, absolute disaster, but we're obviously a necessity. But on the other side of it, I help a young driver now, and I look at him and it's a wee bit like looking in a mirror but 20 years ago, and seeing him going through some of the same growing pains that I did, making some of the same mistakes, and trying to sort of, he can't stop people making mistakes, and I do believe they've got to experience the negative themselves to understand how to not have it happen again. And you can't just tell them, well, don't do that, or this won't happen. You can guide them to a certain level, but that does interest me. I have to say that the young driver development and the next generation, especially in this moving world that we're in and the fast pace that it's changing at, I quite like that, and I quite like the challenges that could pose. But right now, I'm trying to work out all my wee problems on circuits and off circuits and everything else, as opposed to necessarily helping anyone else too much.
Allan McNish, and of course I was more than half serious that he could well be a next president of the FIA or something like that, a position of responsibility within the sport. He has the sport in the right place, I think, in his heart. He understands it, he's logical, he's a clear thinker, he expresses himself well, and he will be worth watching at Le Mans this weekend, one of the contenders for outright victory at Le Mans. Well, let's have a look at the cars now. No better person to do that with than our regular technical expert, Craig Scarborough.
I was up at the WEC at Silverstone. When was that? Back in early May, I think it may have been. Fascinating to see these cars up close. You know, as you say, the technology in the LMP category is now, in some respects, it's surpassing F1 because they've got a lot more freedom, a lot more options with what they do with the engines and with the aerodynamics and with the chassis. So it's quite exciting. And I had a really good chance to get up close to the cars, and obviously invited into the Toyota garage and actually saw the two cars being stripped down in preparation for the race on Sunday. So amazing to see these cars in all of their detail, and literally are F1 cars with roofs and mudguards on. Fantastic stuff.
And when you go to the Toyota garage, I guess you recognise quite a lot of the faces there, and it's nice to see that F1 heritage being applied and not being completely wasted. Nice to see Toyota going racing.
Exactly. I mean, it's very much the same group of people that had Toyota F1, obviously within the same facility over in Cologne, led by Pascal Vasselon on the chassis side again. Had a really good chat with him at Silverstone, and as you say, recognised faces, but equally when you go and have a look at the Toyota TS030, it does look so reminiscent of the F1 car. If you can, most of the bodywork was off, but the chassis underneath and all the mechanics just look so familiar to me, having looked at the Toyota so carefully in F1 over the years. It's very, very similar. These have got highly complex hybrid systems. They don't call it KERS in endurance. It calls it much more the road relevant hybrid. And
which is more logical, isn't it? I mean, how many road car manufacturers are talking about KERS or ERS for that matter?
Nobody understands KERS. And as soon as you say hybrid, and it's interesting to know sometimes the Mercedes engine drivers will say their hybrid KERS system just to underline the fact that it is is a hybrid system as opposed to this kind of made up term that everyone has applied to it. But they've got highly complex hybrid systems. Plus, the Audi's got a turbocharged engine. There's a lot of other management of fuel and things during the race. The drivers have quite a high workload. I mean, they haven't got DRS to play with, but they've got pretty much everything else, at their fingertips inside the cockpit. The key thing is to have a look at the two major contenders for the 24-hour race this weekend, which is the Audi, which they're describing as the e-tron Quattro, externally, both these cars look fairly similar. I mean, we can pick out some aerodynamic differences, but it's very much the current vogue of LMP cars, where you have these front wheel pods and not much more than turning vanes making up most of the bodywork before it then bodywork sweeps back towards side pods and the rear wheel arches. Both the teams have got really complicated front underwings, and if we'll have a look at the picture from underneath the Audi, it very much looks like a pre-2009 Formula One wing under the car. This big curved dipped wing, very large in between the front wheel pods, and that is allowed to vent through these vanes and open areas between the wheel pods and the chassis. It's highly complex aero. It's something F1 aerodynamicists would love to get the chance to play with, I'm sure, with the amount of surface that they've got. They've got almost full ground effect tunnels. They're not allowed to have skirts, but you can see in the picture from underneath that these cars do have quite large tunnels to create quite a large amount of downforce. Obviously at Le Mans, downforce isn't so critical in as much that the teams are trying to shed as much drag as they can for these long straights, despite them being interspersed now with these chicanes. So all the teams have gone for one of these long tail setups at the back of the car to try and streamline that car that little bit extra to reduce drag, lowered the rear wing down to try and get it out of the airflow a little bit. But one of the key things on the Audi aerodynamically is they've gone for a Formula One style blown diffuser. And you'll probably recall when you spoke to Paddy Lowe when he was still at McLaren about a year ago, he was talking about their fantail exhaust. And it's what was mythically called the octopus exhaust, actually turned out to be a fantail, where they had the exhaust formed into two very thin slots alongside the rear wheels. And Audi have pretty much copied this concept completely onto the back of their e-tron Quattro, and yeah, they're getting some benefit. Again, it's energizing the airflow through the diffuser. It's stopping their relatively large rear tyres messing up the airflow going into the diffuser as well. So, it's all very relevant technology between the two sports. They're very, very similar. But it's probably when we come to the powertrains that, these two cars differ the most. Audi, historically over the past few years, have developed the turbo diesel racing engine. In fact, they've probably pretty much pioneered it and have taken away all of the championships and the wins with this. They've got I think it's a 3.4 litre V6, very wide angle, very reminiscent of the old Ferrari engines of the early 80s, with a single turbocharger plonked on top. And this drives a fairly conventional gearbox, 7 speeds with a carbon case, which obviously is relatively new in endurance racing. Their hybrid system differs in that they actually have their motor generator unit on the front axle of the car. And there's certain rules that prevent them using this in quite the same way as the Toyota do in terms of at what speed they can actually start to discharge the curves to get the boost. But when they do have their hybrid boost available, it's driving through the front wheels. So during that hybrid boosted acceleration, it's a 4-wheel drive car, so they've got no issues with traction, and they can bring that on relatively early in the acceleration phases. Again, another sort of link back to F1 is Audi's hybrid system has its energy storage manufactured by Williams, and it's the Williams flywheel system, which never actually made it into F1 from a race perspective, but it was tested. So Williams have developed this technology for Audi, and it sits in the passenger seat next to the driver, which at first for both these energy recovery systems were a bit shocked that the driver was sitting next to some very high voltage equipment, and in the case of the flywheel, some very fast moving equipment. But as we've seen, these cars have had some fairly major crashes over the years, and that passenger compartment is as safe as the driver's compartment. So we can be happy that there's no safety issue there, that is a safe place for the driver to be sitting. If we look over at the Toyota, they've gone probably as different as you could on the powertrain. They have a petrol, normally aspirated V8 engine, 3.7 litres. And this is, again, linked through a 7-speed gearbox. And in their case, it's a transverse gearbox to try and reduce the length, and it's made in aluminium. And their energy recovery system, the motor generator actually sits between the engine and the gearbox, which is somewhat like the F1 setup. F1 teams tended to have the motor generator on the front of the engine, but for the packaging reasons, they've put theirs in between. And their energy storage is quite exciting. I mean, even the name, supercapacitors. And again, it's quite literally, their energy recovery system is very much like the flash bulb in your camera. The voltage builds up in these capacitors, and when you're ready to go, you hit the button, and bang, you've got this very sudden, very powerful boost of electric to pass through, in their case, the rear wheels. So they've got a kind of a 300 horsepower boost to what is already a 500 horsepower engine when they're on their hybrid acceleration, which gives them a massive turn of speed. It probably, adding everything together, it's arguable that Toyota have a greater amount of power available for the drivers through their system, and it's available for more of the lap because it's a rear-wheel drive system rather than the front-wheel drive. So very, very different technologies. I would suspect an F1 car still probably produces more downforce, simply because they've actually got slightly more surface area in which to create the wings and the diffusers. But I would say if you had a race between these two, I reckon it would be pretty tight. I would imagine one of them would certainly qualify for a Grand Prix on the same track on the same day. I mean, the technology in terms of the car's reliability, in terms of the tyres they have available, even the brakes, where obviously, previously brake changes were a key part of the pit stop strategy. Now these brakes will last the whole race. It's incredible. And as you say, they can go flat out pretty much for every stint for 24 hours, weather allowing. It's absolutely incredible, and it's great to watch, both on the track and with the TV.
That's Le Mans this weekend. Next weekend, a quick reminder that we will have 2 shows previewing the British Grand Prix at Silverstone. One on Thursday at the regular slot of 7 o'clock, another on Friday, also at 7 o'clock, both live streamed on YouTube, both with a host of guests and stars on a panel, your opportunity to ask questions from the F1 Racing Fan Village at Whittlebury near the Beckett's entrance. Both shows sponsored by Yas Marina of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. And if that's not all, Rob Wilson, who will be on both shows, will in addition have his band playing live after both shows. So lots to look forward to, lots to prepare for, lots to enjoy at Silverstone next Thursday and Friday. If you're not going to be there, remember you can live stream it on YouTube. If you are going to be there, we'll see you there. Get your questions ready. It's basically going to be 2 shows of questions to a panel of stars, F1 racing stars and stars from the world of Formula One. See you then.